Hello, I am Brock Stanton. I am an aspiring meteorologist, and today we are going to be taking a look at this slight risk across mostly portions of eastern Oklahoma, but also some surrounding areas into Missouri, Kansas, and Arkansas as well could also see severe weather. We are going to see that the hail and wind are going to be the primary risk, especially I think the hail is going to be the most widespread risk. Not super widespread, but that'll be the most significant risk with this. Damaging winds will also be possible, as well as a brief weak tornado is also possible, but again, I overall think that risk is going to be pretty low. And then when we take a look at our day 4, we're going to see a broader slight risk does exist across areas ranging from South Dakota down into western Kansas, a pretty broad area in this day 4 risk. But we are now going to be taking a look at our HRRR for this day 2 risk, which will be Wednesday, April 20th. And as we look, we're going to see there's some morning showers. But as those clear out, storms do erupt on this model farther east. However, they do try to initiate a little farther southwest. And I do think they could form even further southwest, though this particular model does not show that. You can see how they continue into the overnight hours. And these storms will mostly be a hail and damaging wind risk. Brief tornado will also be possible, but I think that threat is going to be more limited, and I'll show you why in a minute. But first, we're going to take a look at our instability. And we are going to notice that our instability is going to be sufficient for the severe weather setup. We're going to have values widespread over 1,000. You're going to see even, well, it's a skinny axis, the Cape values perhaps over 2,000 across portions of Oklahoma, southeastern Kansas, and just take a sounding from here, see what it looks like quickly. So a little bit of curving in our photograph, which could support that brief tornado potential, but overall the upper level and low level winds aren't as favorable for tornadoes as we have been seeing recently, which is great news. And sufficient Cape as well as deep water shear just overall favorable for severe weather, but not as much tornadoes, mostly more just damaging winds and hail. So the atmosphere is much more favorable for those two than tornadoes. We're going to take a look at the biggest reason why the tornado threat's going to be low end, and that is because this 850 jet is going to be displaced off to the east. We look at let's get to 4 o'clock. Storms are forming like up here, around here, and the 850 jet's going to be displaced off to the east. So that's going to make it harder for a storm to produce a tornado. If a storm was able to reach this environment, and the tornado increase would increase some, like if over here, if a storm were to reach this environment, you can see the photograph does curve pretty favorably, but even if a storm does that, tornado threat would still be fairly isolated, and we're not really sure that's going to happen. So overall tornado risk is going to be very low. So we looked at our Cape. We're going to take a look at our deep layer shear, and that's going to be what's going to be more favorable for this event compared to our low level shear. Our deep layer shear is going to be generally over 40 knots, perhaps 40 to 50 knots of bulk shear, and that will help organize these storms perhaps into some supercells. And that's why I think hail will be the most widespread risk with this. Another reason I think that is because we're going to have these steep lapse rates. And as we see into daytime heating, peak heating, we have this quarter of lapse rates of over 7 spreading from eastern Oklahoma up through eastern Kansas. Perhaps areas could be up over 8 in western Missouri, which could lead to greater destabilization of the atmosphere, which is something very critical to watch, because moderate instability and moderate deep water shear does lead to some severe risk. So if this were to develop further north, then perhaps the severe weather could spread a little further north than what is currently indicated. But we'll just have to watch and see. I'm not really too certain about that. So we're just going to take a quick look at our energy helicity index, which is our blend of Cape and shear, and we're going to see how the values increase some, and while this axis is pretty narrow here, we can see it does peak areas around eastern Kansas through western Missouri, like kind of like right on the border. It'd be interesting to watch and see if a storm can mature in that environment. Again, I think hail would be the main risk with that. Either way, we are now going to take a look at our NAM 3K, and we're going to look and we're going to see that this model does develop those storms further west. And again, in the day, you can still see those showers ongoing, but as we get just past peak heating here, you can see these supercells develop pretty close to the Oklahoma City area. Let's just take a sounding here to the east of these. We can see that there is that capping inversion, but the stronger forcing allows the storms to break through, along with moderate CAPE. That leads to a risk of damaging winds and hail. Hodograph looks super messy, so tornado potential is going to be very, very low with those storms if they develop. But damaging winds and hail would be the primary risk with that. And we're going to take a look at our instability just overall compared to that one little sounding. And we're going to see how this one, I mentioned how the HRR developed this greater instability. NAM does not do that. It keeps it much more limited because of those morning showers. And we're going to see how the instability mostly is just banked up right along the dry line here. Storms initiate along the dry line and are capable of hail and damaging winds. Again, a brief tornado is possible, but I really don't find it too likely. So we saw our mixed layer CAPE. We're now going to take a look at our bulk shear quickly. And we're going to see that's also favorable for severe weather, much like the HRR. These values of over 40 knots support supercell thunderstorms. And given the moderate amount of instability, that does favor hail and damaging winds. And again, I think hail is going to be the biggest risk with this setup is going to be these lapse rates. You can see as we get into peak heating, you can see these lapse rates around 7 to 8 are going to be here, and that's going to support that large hail. So, again, I think hail and damaging winds main risk. Very isolated tornado possible, but that's what most of the ingredients are pointing towards, a wind and hail risk. We're going to take a quick look at our energy helicity index, which is that reminder that's our blend of instability and shear. And this, again, allows us to see how, in this model on like central Oklahoma for the most substantial risk of severe weather. Again, still not too widespread, but thought it was worth making a video on. And you can see again overnight decreases. We are now going to take a look at our day 4 risk. We're going to zoom out some because we're not really sure like we know a pretty broad area where severe weather will exist. We don't know the exact location for it yet. We are going to be taking a look at the 12Z GFS just because I haven't had time to look at the 18Z yet, and this far out the difference between 12 and 18Z is not too significant in my opinion. So, looking at the 12Z GFS, again today on Thursday and here on Friday, we can see this instability does develop across portions of Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, perhaps South Dakota, even right along the warm front. I'm going to take a sounding here. You can see there is a curving hodograph. There is a capping inversion, but I think areas in the northern part of the outlook are going to have a stronger forcing, in that could lead to storms breaking a cap that otherwise would seem more likely to suppress thunderstorm development. You can see here's our CAPE, and now that I think we have a little better idea, I think we might be able to zoom in just a little bit more onto the central United States. Let's just check that this is going to cover it all. Yeah, I think that gets it all done mostly. Yeah, that should work. We're going to take a look at our bulk shear. now. And as we get into the day on Friday, we're going to notice how it increases some into the evening hours, but it's not going to be quite as strong as our bulk shares we were talking with on our system for Wednesday. But still, values of 30 to 40 knots will support storms, severe storms, and given our low-level shear, which is going to be stronger with this system, see, especially as we get into the evening hours, we could see by 0Z 7 o'clock Central Time, you can see these values of, the reds are over 50 knots, and that does support a somewhat more robust tornado threat, though there's so many things that go into forecasting tornadoes that I'm not really as confident in the tornado risk for this. We set it up despite the favorable low-level shear. We're just going to have to watch it. We're still got plenty of time to figure this out. I do think at least an isolated tornado threat will exist with this setup, just because the low-level shear does seem to be quite strong, but while I think low-level shear is the most important ingredient, I'm not sure the other things are going to line up yet, and if so, how they're going to overlap, so we're just going to have to watch and see with that. But the favorable low-level shear does suggest all hazards will be possible. So we took a look at our bulk shear, we took a look at our CAPE, let's take a look at our lapse rates. And as we see, there's going to be sufficient lapse rates for all hazards here, pretty widespread over 7 to 8. Again, that's gonna support our damaging wind and hail risk, and again, more things are going to be determined with the tornado risk, though I do think it will exist and likely be at least a tiny bit higher than what we have tomorrow, but that's not really saying much. We're now just going to take a quick look at our surface-based CAPE and hodograph overlap. This just kind of shows our overlap of our turning of the hodograph, which you want to look for tornado potential, as well as our instability. And as we look, you can see how in this area we get a more curving storm, it's a more curving hodograph, especially into 0Z as the low-level jet increases. But something that I'm not as confident with is our moisture. Now, you won't see it as much on the GFS, you'll see it a little more on their Euro. But the moisture return, it's kind of been a little bit all over the place with the system. And you can see by 0Z, these western areas are just not going to have the moisture. These eastern areas up along the warm front there would have it if storms develop, which I do think is likely, but it is still uncertain. This area right in here, I would think has the greatest chance for convective initiation, but we'll just have to wait and see. And the reason I bring this up is that some models are, such as the GFS, are not firing storms in this environment. Because of that capping inversion, it's not going to be quite as stout as what we had from the time of recording a week ago that was able to suppress most of the thunderstorm development across Oklahoma and Kansas, and then you really only had severe thunderstorms in Texas and Iowa. I don't think it's not going to be quite as strong as that, so I do think storms will break through, but as we get into 7 o'clock Friday evening, we can see how storms really haven't fired yet, and maybe they eventually develop. This is 10 o'clock, so this GFS says an overnight severe weather threat, but looking at GFS reflectivity impact input 4 days out doesn't mean much from my experience. I think a lot of people would agree with that. We're now going to take a look at our NAM. This is unfortunately only going to show through 7 o'clock Central Time, but I do think at this range NAM is the best model. It's my personal favorite, so still want to take a look at it. We're going to see how we get into the day here, and then we're looking at Thursday. Instability is coming up Friday. You can see, and this is 0Z, how we have our instability seems to be placed a little further west. You can see our dry line right here. Our warm front's going to be right up there. So this model is maybe saying convective initiation is likely further west, and that is in more agreement with the Storm Prediction Center outlook. You see, has that a little farther west. Yeah, again, dry line here, warm front here. I believe our low pressure system is going to be off over here. So not a perfect triple point, but still an area of stronger forcing. And we'll just take a sounding here. You can see our curving hodograph does support tornado threat. It's still at lingering capping inversion, but I do think that storms could break through that cap. Seems likely to me at this point. Not a guarantee, but it does seem more likely than not that it will. And we're also going to take a look at our bulk shear quick. And we're going to see how... Wait, we can actually see a little further than I thought we would. I think I must have been looking at 12Z earlier. That's exciting, so we can see a little further. You can see how this develops and kind of shrinks. The severe threat would end by this point, but nice we can see a little farther than what I thought. I guess let's go back to bulk shear. I got a little bit distracted there. We can see how by 21Z, 4 o'clock and into 7 o'clock, again, bulk shear like 35 to 40 knots, which is going to be, it's not great, but it's sufficient, especially given that low level shear, which, let's take a look at it now. See 21Z, you can see you have a widespread 40 knot low level jet, 35, 45 knot low level jet, and as we get into 0Z, it increases greater, like 45 to 55 knots. And again, this does support a tornado threat, though I'm not really sure that where that will be maximized and to what extent. There's just still a lot of uncertainty in this day 4 through 8 range. And then again, really, it's even stronger into the overnight hours by 10 o'clock, and yeah, even by 6Z it's a lot stronger, but that's severe threat would likely be winding down by then anyway, unless we had a purely nocturnal event, which I'm not seeing any indication of right now. So we are going to take a look at our composite reflectivity and just kind of see if the NAM does try to form storms. And this one, it generally, again, doesn't. I do think that since the capping inversion is not the strongest along the dry line, that storms are still likely to form, but the GFS and NAM don't like to fire them. I will say the Euro does, and we'll take a look at the Euro in a second, but before we do that, we're just going to take a look at our energy helicity index, our blend of cape and shear, and we're just going to see how the environment is pretty favorable. We see values of perhaps over 10, and if storms do develop, the environment will be favorable of all hazards. So there's just uncertainty with storm coverage, how much moisture there is. It's not extremely clear yet how substantial a severe weather threat this will be. Let's take a really quick look at lapse rates. We're going to see is going to be favorable. Widespread area on the NAM over 7. Also a fairly widespread area of over 8. So that would certainly be supportive of a hail risk for storms that develop. So we did take a look at our NAM. We're now going to take a look at our Euro. And just see what the Euro likes to do for our instability axis. We're going to see how it does develop sufficient cape, and it does eat it away by 0Z, and that is because storms do form. You can see them right along here. Well, I'll show you that in a second. In fact, how about we look at it right now? Let's see. 21Z here. Our storms are initiating. Just take a sounding out of them, just to see what the environment's like. Not as much curving with the hodograph, and moisture is a lot less in that sounding, and that's why I'm saying I'm not too confident with the moisture return for this system. I think regardless we'll have sufficient instability, but the reason moisture is important is to get tornadoes, you want a temperature dew point spread of less than 20. In this particular sounding right now, it's 30, so those storms will likely be too high base to get thunders to get a tornado risk. Extend farther east, we can see this model tries to form a squall line, and we can see here how then there's a little better moisture, temperatures have cooled off a little bit, so the temperature dew point spread itself is favorable for severe weather, but now there's a stronger cap. So again, that's why I'm just saying I'm not too sure about how substantial the tornado risk would be, or if it will even be substantial. It could just be isolated. So we saw that. We saw the instability. Let's just take a broader scale look at how much more messy the Euro is with the dew points. Just so we can kind of visualize it more. You can see it's just not as clean as what the GFS was, and I don't think I showed it to you to the NAM, but the NAM had much more organized moisture access. You see it's not the most organized, much lower, especially for those areas farther west. So that does cast some uncertainty on the moisture return for this setup. It's kind of to watch as we get into the day 3 and day 2 range. Hopefully we'll have a clearer idea on what that is. Let's take a look at our well-level jet, and we can see how the well-level jet right here of 30 to 40 knots, and later on, depending on where you are, either like 40 to 50 knots, or perhaps even 50 to 60 knots. Though again, remember on this model, the storms are over here, so this low-level jet does not matter as much. Again, it supports all hazards, but it's just still a lot of uncertainty at this range. I'm not really seeing a clear signal on what the primary hazard is going to be for this event. I'm just going to take a look at the lightning density, which is something cool on the Euro, just so you can kind of visualize the storms a little bit. You can see, this is over 6 hours, how there's all these storms erupting, you know, tracking east. So that shows where our risk of severe weather could be. With the ingredients overlap with severe weather and you're seeing storms there, then that means there could probably be severe weather. We are going to take a brief look at our CAPE and hodograph overlap to see what the general hodographs are for these severe thunderstorms. And we can see, again, they turn a little bit across this area, but they're not the greatest because the 850/low level jet is not as strong, so yeah, and it curves more to the east, but there's no real instability, not nearly as much instability for those storms. So in summary, a risk of severe weather will likely exist across portions of Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota, and perhaps Iowa as well, but it's just not really clear if all of those areas will be under it, or under the risk, or how high it will be, what will be the primary hazards. All those things are still to be figured out, but overall risk of severe weather does appear likely across this area. So we'll be monitoring that. I'll likely have a video out tomorrow giving everyone watching an update on this. So if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, as well as following me on Twitter. Link in the description. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.